When I was working in northern Norway, I remember my on-call was we got a phone call from Svalbard, sort of emergency room because they don't have a hospital there. That a German tourist had been bitten in the head by a polar bear, and that's because the German tourist had been enthusiastic enough to walk off the ship that he wasn't supposed to walk out of because there was a polar bear sighting, and you're not supposed to do that.
So, welcome, Cara. We are honored to have you on mama leave on your baby walk.
Thank you.
So, first baby, is it as awful as they say?
No, not really. She's quite good, actually.
Come on, she isn't gonna listen to this for another 15 years, so it's okay. You can be honest.
Well, the first one was quite difficult because she would wake up every hour, but now she doesn't sleep very much during the day, and she wakes up at 4:30 in the morning. I
Yeah.
think she's inherited my sleep patterns, which I don't really envy her.
You said that when mama leave ends that you're gonna continue napping at work. You told me this privately, and for those who don't know, we're talking about quite a senior surgeon, the most educated person to appear on this show so far. So I'm just wondering, when you're operating on people, is it a bit unfair to the person who has the operation before your nap versus the one that gets to be after your nap?
Well, to be fair, we don't really sleep at work, and that was a joke. But
We don't do jokes on this show. This is a serious program.
I think it's quite difficult to do 24-hour shifts, to be fair, which we do normally when we're on call. And when you do 24-hour shifts, you do feel sorry for the patients that you're going to operate on after the 20th hour because you are really tired, but the adrenaline kicks in and you kind of sort of forget everything and forget the tiredness.
So tell me, you're in Denmark right now. What preparations is everyone doing for the upcoming invasion?
From hoarding on toilet paper and I don't know, tomato beans, I don't think they're doing anything, to be fair.
Right. Are those Danish like staple items?
No,
How
not
do you
really.
cook the tomato beans with toilet paper?
You probably suck the last. Sorry,
Yeah.
that was really funny. You probably suck all the spice out of it and then with the toilet paper, and then you just eat the tomato. I don't know.
Yeah. I
No.
I can actually tell you how you cook with toilet paper. So in the army we used to do this. If you have tuna in oil,
Yeah.
and if you put one square of toilet paper, you open the can, you put one square of toilet paper above the oily tuna, then you light it at the four corners of the toilet paper, and then it all burns slowly, and then at the end you have this sort of barbecue flavored tuna.
I'm not sure that's better. But yeah, I think what Denmark are doing is imposing a war tax at they're talking about imposing a war tax on the common man so that we can pay more of our money to the armed forces. So I think that's what they're doing. And when it comes to food items, everything has become exponentially more expensive, like 300% more expensive, I would think. Yeah, a lot of people are actually just, harboring a lot of food and stuff, but I don't think there are necessarily any sort of plans that people are taking.
Yeah, so he wanted to invade Greenland, right? First of all, can we just acknowledge that that name is stupid? Why is Iceland called Iceland and it's mostly green? And Greenland is called Greenland and it's mostly ice?
Yeah,
On behalf of the Danish people, would you explain that to everyone?
I don't actually know why it's called Greenland, to be fair. I should have read up on it. I think it's quite a stupid name as well. We laugh about it just at home as well, that it's called Greenland. But yeah, I mean, the Danish people do have something they should have said to the Greenlander community because they are and they have been quite racist towards them, just like I suppose Norwegians and Swedish people have been towards Samis and all the ethnic minorities.
Well, I'm not too worried about the indigenous people up there. You know why? because I believe that being invaded by like American Marines from Minnesota and Texas, that'll be the most polite and gentle invasion they will have ever been a part of, compared to all the others who have invaded them, including the Danes.
Well, you mean you're talking about what? The Vikings?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I
So
guess you're right.
and Trump doesn't care about the environment or animals or everything. He's gonna go like, yeah, hunt the whales, hunt everything, do your thing. So they might be all right, the indigenous folks up there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it might just be like Puerto Rico or anything that they would probably not have the right to vote and probably not have any better quality of life under the Americans. But, one of the things that Denmark actually does provide a lot of money to Greenland every single year. And it's a net sort of, when you look at the balance of things, I think we give more money to Greenland than the other way around. If you look at the healthcare system, I think it would probably stop existing if the Danish doctors and nurses didn't actually go up there and work in Greenland, or if we didn't educate the Greenland.
Yeah, a doctor who I know was really fascinated and wanted to go to Greenland because apparently they have really fun diseases, academically fun diseases, I mean. Like, because it's such an isolated population that the social diseases, as we call them, this is not a filthy show, we call them social diseases.
Yeah, sure.
That they're interesting up there.
Yeah, they are. And not just the social diseases, but, because they've got a net doctor shortage and nurse shortage, and there are very few hospitals and very few clinics, they're still quite far behind in the infrastructure or in the health infrastructure. So if you're pregnant and you're having cesarean section, then, you best be close to a hospital. Otherwise, you'll be flown to Copenhagen for anything that's even minutely more serious. People with cancer often end up sort of flying to Denmark to get treatment and then flying back and forth, and that's quite an expense that they have to sort of live with, and that's really sad because the health, and it's the same with the Faroe Islands. Let's say, give an example of any bone cancer, for example, or myeloma or something like that, where you need to get chemotherapy or bone marrow transplant or anything like that. That happens in Denmark, or chemotherapy every single week. That would be in Denmark. So they'd either have to sort of stay in hospital for a really long time in Denmark and then get treatment, or fly back and forth, which is really, really difficult, I would suppose, if you're that far away.
Yeah, well, Trump would say, well, maybe it's shorter to fly over to us, eh?
Yeah, but people can't afford, healthcare is free at the cost of use here in Denmark, and people won't be able to afford that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And the sheer poverty in Greenland is very high. So, if people had to afford that kind of healthcare like they have in the US, then I think most Greenlanders would actually not have healthcare.
Yeah, and the American insurance companies are swine. They wouldn't give a single Greenland person health insurance because their lifestyle is dangerous by virtue of living in Greenland.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, traditionally, when the Danes introduced alcohol to Greenland hundreds of years ago, they also had a huge alcohol misuse issue. I think one of the things that's lingered in the folklore of Greenland is that they are drinkers. So yeah, it's a bit like the Indian population in places like Vegas, for example. Same kind of diseases, same kind of sort of social inequity, which makes sense because if you look at that population and how isolated it's been, and they're lost a lot of their own, their own identity, I suppose. They have to learn Danish at school and speak Danish, and their names are not respected. So a lot of the Greenlanders, when they come to Denmark, Danify their names.
They're called like Lars.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, Christian and Lars and Frederick, and
Everyone's called Christian Christensen in Denmark, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Or Frederickson. Yeah, I think, the Danish people lack a certain fantasy when it comes to names.
I think that's a good point about the indigenous folks. I think we've done it everywhere. I mean, I didn't do any of it, but people have done it everywhere when it comes to alcohol and drugs. Like, look at Alaska, or in Lapland, they're all alcoholics. Yeah, exactly. Alaska is fucked. And And even the jungle folks that they encounter, the missionaries and stuff, they ruin them too.
Yeah, I think introduction of Christianity has definitely played a very hazardous role, and this is coming from somebody who goes to church.
Right, we're gonna cut all that out. We don't tolerate any blasphemy on this channel. That's too rich even for you.
No, but yeah, I think, one of the things that, so at my workplace and a lot of the workplaces in Denmark, especially the health industry, if we wanted to go and spend, let's say, a month in Greenland, we'd be able to do that. And that would be on the Danish health authorities. So we wouldn't have to take any time off to do that. It would be part of sort of my everyday work if I wanted to go there for 6 months and work and then come back to my job. So I could take a leave of absence and do that. And I think I might do that one day because I think it would be fascinating to see how their healthcare system works. And we often get emails about it pretty much every week saying, would you like to come and work in Greenland, hospital in Nuuk or somewhere else?
I always like that name for a city, Nook,
No,
because it's
yeah.
like a little nook, right?
Yeah.
But it's not that cozy of a nook, because you get like eaten by polar bears up there, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit like living in northern Norway, which I've also done. I suspect it's a bit like Svalbard.
Yeah, so up there in those bits of the world, what is the mortality rate out of all deaths in society due to polar bears and walruses is what, like 50%? 50%
No,
of
I don't
all
think so.
excess deaths?
No, I think when I was working in northern Norway, I remember my on call was we got a phone call from Svalbard, sort of emergency room because they don't have a hospital there. That a German tourist had been bitten in the head by a polar bear, and that's because the German tourist had been enthusiastic enough to walk off the ship that he wasn't supposed to walk out of because there was a polar bear sighting, and you're not supposed to do that. So what they ended up doing was to take the polar bear down, but not the human down, which was quite a shitty thing to do to the polar bear because the polar bear was in his or her sort of habitat, and the German tourist wasn't. But we debrided his wound, and he came to my hospital, and he was luckily, after 75 odd polar bear claws to his head, his brain was intact. He didn't have any intracerebral injury. He just had an extracerebral injury with sort of flesh wounds. Lucky for
Whoa.
him.
Yeah.
So he must have been really thick skulled, eh? But
Yeah. Well, yeah, in more ways than one. And he was a German, so he probably tasted all sour. Yeah.
yeah, probably tastes like sauerkraut and
Yeah, polar bears, they're one of the few animals that actually you can observe them hunting humans, as in they catch the scent of a human and they will follow it for miles. Whereas most animals might opportunistically eat people, but they won't set off, wake up in the morning hunting for a human. Like tigers somewhere in like Borneo or whatever, or Indonesia, or wherever that happens, and India, and polar bears, and then like saltwater crocs in Australia. I can't think of that many that actually, actively hunt people.
well, I mean, if you look at the vast land that is Svalbard or Greenland, and the polar bear hasn't seen any food for what days or months or whatever, and they've been asleep for a few months, then obviously, I think if a human being hadn't seen any other thing and they didn't have anything else to eat, they'll probably eat each other like they did when that plane crashed was it in the 50s or 40s, or I don't remember when it was.
The rugby team, the movie Alive in
Yeah,
the Andes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, it's quite fascinating to see sort of anthropologically how humans act in that scenario.
This whole Greenland thing is fascinating because I've been on a massive rabbit hole binging content of the Falklands War. So I was thinking this with Greenland's going to be similar, like a big empire, colonial territory. And Denmark isn't an empire anymore, but used to be.
But it was actually a Norwegian territory before it was a Danish territory. And yeah, I mean, the Greenlander need to be free, obviously, but I don't think they can afford to be free, to be fair.
Yeah, yeah. I'm wondering, like, Falklands War was very nasty, and we think of it as some kind of silly little war, but it was actually quite tough down there.
It was very,
And
very bloody, yeah.
yeah, and I think this could be very, like, if something goes down up there, it could be quite interesting, because I don't think it'll be easy for the
Uh,
Americans to just take it.
well, I
I don't
mean, I
know.
don't think, considering Denmark defeated in what, a day when the Germans invaded,
Yeah,
I don't think Denmark can sort of flex their muscles and be like, yeah, we'll go against a superpower like the US. I think, that's not going to happen. I think if America wants Greenland, then unless they go out of NATO and try to
yeah.
sort of, obviously, I think America will win because now they've also got Putin on their side.
Well, I'm just excited about what kind of golf resort Trump is planning up there. I think it might be really cool. Maybe like a compromise solution. Just let Elon put a rocket station up there, let Trump have a couple of golf resorts, and we can move on from there, you know?
I think they could have easily done that with Denmark's help without having to take over because America already had naval bases and their air force base in Greenland, and it's sort of like free way basically for Americans to do whatever the hell they want. And if they had just played their cards in a different way, I think Denmark would have probably been like, yeah, sure, why not? You know, but they've royally pissed the Danish people off.
Speaking of Danish people, so we're gonna touch a little bit on your immigrant experience. First of all, too, can you tell us all how many degrees you have in total if you had to count them?
I think for one in possession of sort of getting the fifth one.
But you're not counting all the nonsense ones. Like you have an MA as well to
Yeah, no, yeah, no,
so counting all the honorary ones, what are we talking about?
six.
6. Okay.
And then
It's
I
not.
would then probably, I'm gonna get a PhD as well. So.
Yeah. Do you ever like go to like collectors meetings and go like, well, I'll trade my Cambridge PhD for like a rare associate's degree in finance from that Trump university that was a scam or something that doesn't exist anymore?
My PhD is probably going to be for a Danish university, but no, yeah. No, I don't.
I know like 50 people who have PhDs from Cambridge, but I don't know anyone who went to Trump's university.
Yeah, exactly. Considering Trump University probably isn't a legit source of knowledge.
No, but on the collector's market, the degree certificate, rarity is what drives price in baseball cards and stuff. I think you'd have to trade one. You'd have to trade one for one. You can have real education from mine, but I will take the collector's value of yours. You see what I mean?
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure, sure.
But with 6 degrees, do people still treat you as a dirty immigrant in Denmark?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
yeah, this is audio only, but the kind of people who put other people in boxes based on their appearance, they could put you in any box from like
Absolutely, absolutely.
Pakistan to Chile to North Africa to India to Middle East. Like you could be in any box. So how do people treat you in Denmark?
I often get put in the Middle Eastern box because Denmark has an abundance of Middle Eastern immigrants. Usually, when you're sort of walking around, people just look at you and they think that you're stupid. And when you open your mouth or you're at work, yeah, people sort of think a little less of you than they would of a white person in the same position. For example, I had two encounters which sort of, shook me a little bit, but one of them I think I handled both of them pretty well, to be fair, for an immigrant, if I may tell you about them.
Well, first, one question quickly before I want to hear these, but firstly, do you speak the language without an accent?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, you do. All right. Yeah, well, go ahead. Sorry.
So basically, one of the events happened a year and a half ago, and the other one happened about 5 years ago. 1.5 years ago, I was the head surgeon, and so we've got different surgical departments. Mine is general surgery, and one of the rare occasions when 9 o'clock in the morning, we don't have very much on a surgical program at the moment, at that point in time. So the thoracic surgeon calls me up and says, listen, I really need your help because our operating theatres are booked because we're going to be participating in a lung transplant. So would you be able to do a tracheostomy, which is sort of putting a pipe in somebody's windpipe to make them breathe? Well, or change one because there was a infection in the previous one. And I said, yeah, sure, of course I will. We're not doing very much. So I organized that with my operating theatre staff, with the anaesthetist, with the basically the ward and everything. And the patient came downstairs. She sees me, and I'm standing next to a very tall Danish bloke who was a medical student at the time. And she says, well, I don't want that doctor. And everybody's like, well, she's the head doctor today. And I was like, I'm sorry, why would you not want me as a doctor? What's the reason? And she said, well, I don't really like black people, and I don't want a black doctor.
So she was colorblind as well then? Or was that a
Pretty
symptom?
much, yeah.
Because you're sort of, what's a good word that you like?
Well, I am not ethnically white, which is fair enough. But I thought it was ridiculous because the woman was in the intensive care unit at the thoracic department because she had a massive staphylococcal infection to her heart and she needed this change. So I basically stressed the importance of her disease to her. I said, listen, madam, you're not going to be able to get this line in any other way today because you have an infection and we need to change the source of infection so that you can get better. If not, you are likely looking at death. So if you'd rather die than be treated by a brown person, then it's, the call's yours. But you're more than welcome.
Did she say death before dishonor? Oh my...
No, she continued saying that she didn't trust me as a doctor without actually knowing anything about me. So I told her that we'll be calling the porter and you'll be going back to the ward because no way, shape or form was any doctor in my department going to touch her after that. And I called my boss and our boss was like, well, I'm brown too, so send them back.
Yeah, but all right. Well, interesting question there. Your medical ethics. I would have thought the next doctor isn't allowed to refuse the patient just because they're a C word, a cancer sufferer.
Well, the thing is, we weren't refusing them. The patient was refusing us. So, when you have 3 people at work that are all brown, then, you have to wait until the next day when the white people come to work.
What was the Danish word or expression for dark person that she used?
She just called me black. She just called me short, which is black.
Yeah, well, that's awful.
For me, like, being black isn't really a problem because big, good black don't crack. Do you know what I mean? But, so that's not really a negative thing for me. But, like, what's negative is how people just treat you without knowing anything about you because you're a different color human being than them. And then I remember 5 years ago, I was sitting in the outpatient department, and this guy came in, older Swedish bloke, and I had at that time a female medical student. She was very much blonde, Scandinavian, model-like, beautiful girl doing medicine, and we were doing outpatient clinic for hernia. So basically, the dude comes in, starts speaking Danish with a Swedish accent. So I said, you may as well just speak Swedish to me. It's fine. And he said, well, do you understand me? As you're not even from Denmark or wherever. And I said, well, if you can speak Swedish to me, no problem. And I responded back in Swedish. And then he started speaking English. And considering English is my mother tongue, I switched to English, which then made him switch to Danish. So, we continued the rest in Danish. And the added element of all of that was that he's told me that he didn't know that women could be doctors, let alone surgeons.
Wait, what country was this person from?
He was Swedish.
Do you think he's from Sweden? Do you think he might have been doing like a Borat impression or something, trying to be funny?
Probably. I have no idea. But, that was really ridiculous as well.
Well, I didn't know women could be doctors either until I met you. So, but...
Well, considering 60% of their medical intake is female, it's pretty stupid to think otherwise. But yeah.
That's fake news, liberal media fake news.
Yeah, totally.
But these two incidents obviously stand out as pretty bad. What is the incidence rate of just little bit of annoying little racism or prejudice towards you? Because I'm thinking the two incidents in a long career could be, I mean, that likelihood of that happening to just a Danish white doctor, he'll encounter two patients who don't want him
Yeah,
in a
sure.
long career. Yeah. So I'm just saying, how on top of these two, how often is there little shit going on?
Well, fairly often, to be fair. You stop noticing it after a while because you just grow a really thick skin. Yeah, in my field, it's mostly about women, rather than color. So it's more like how many female medical students does it take to light a light bulb?
They still make those kinds of jokes, do they?
Yeah, and I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I have a lot of men in my department, very few women, because surgery is still a very male dominated specialty. So I got told, Cara, you're pretty chill for a woman, and you're like one of the boys, which made me think, ooh, whatever. But another part of me made me think, wow, maybe is it because I'm not pretty, or is it because they think I'm a bitch or something like that? But yeah, I don't know.
Well, none of those things are true, but
I don't give a shit is the right answer to be fair.
yeah, yeah, that's very disappointing to hear. I don't necessarily like. I find it hard to judge people that make assumptions just on the street about people. I think we've always done that. I think to a certain extent it comes naturally, like when you see a person who looks different or is doing something different than what you grew up with.
So
You're gonna make a face and take another look and whatever. But in the workplace, when you're clearly, uh, you're clearly competent and probably more than that, more competent than most people around you. So I find that disappointing to hear.
yeah, but I mean, there are also people that really appreciate you, and there are also people that really like you for what you do. Obviously, having studied medicine at Cambridge, anatomical knowledge is a lot better than a lot of other places. Without knowing much about the Danish university system.
Is that because Cambridge is keeping a lot of the human anatomy secret to only them? Like the British Museum is keeping like the ancient Greek statues?
No, not quite. It's probably because you have to pass that anatomy exam with 80%, and this is negatively marked if you don't.
I see, yeah.
And I think it's probably because it's a very in-depth anatomy exam, and it goes through every single year. And if you do a surgical rotation or surgical specialty in the UK, you have to know your anatomy.
Oh, yeah. So, what about immigration in Denmark in general in the hospitals? We have local racists behaving badly. What about, are there any problems with immigrants who don't want to be treated by a woman?
No, it's usually the other way around. It's usually a lot of the females don't want to be treated by men. So, if you're a female doctor, you don't really see those kind of problems very much.
But so how often does it cause some kind of shift related and other problems in your routine because people are requesting a different doctor?
It's rare, to be fair, but then again, I work in a very, very big hospital. So I suppose it's not very common in my hospital. The kind of problems we have is in Denmark, if you are a patient, you have to pay for your own, what's it called, translation services. So if you don't speak Danish and you come from Ukraine or Middle East or wherever, and you don't speak English, then you have to pay for your own translation services, which I think paying for your own interpreter in Denmark is fairly expensive.
Yeah.
Or the fact that Danish people don't really appreciate people that don't eat Danish food. So let's say that you're Muslim or you're Jewish and you're not eating pork or you're not eating in a certain way. That's not the kind of thing they appreciate very much.
So no halal or kosher meals in Danish hospitals?
Nope. Or
Okay.
vegetarian for that matter.
Really?
Yeah, a vegetarian choice will sometimes have bacon in it, which is
So
very stupid.
so how is Danish food? You've lived in lots of countries and you speak is it 37 or 39 languages?
Not quite that many, but yeah.
And you've only also had to live in Britain. How does the food in Denmark compare? I mean, it can't be worse than here.
It isn't. I quite like British food if it's done properly.
You're very posh, like when you say properly, that's like in the Savoy Hotel.
And that's very funny. No, I just mean normal, good food. Danish food, Danes are very proud people in every aspect of the word. And they have a huge food culture. So, Denmark doesn't really have very many good Indian or Italian or French restaurants. They have very good Danish restaurants, which I think is both a positive thing and a negative thing. Positive in the sense that they're very proud of their own food. Negative because they don't really have much spice in their life.
What is a Danish classic?
Danish classic. So you have pork belly with fried fat. Not fried, but sort of like grilled fat. Pork belly with parsley sauce and potatoes. That's very Danish.
Sounds very British to me.
Yeah, I don't think the parsley sauce is very British, but yeah.
In Britain, what disappoints me the most is like all that is fine, but they forget to season everything. So it's like bland, greasy food. Yeah, and in most pubs, you ask for hot sauce or something. They don't even stock it in a pub. I mean, it's a long shelf life item. You can just stock it forever for the two crazy tourists who want flavor in their food. And they just don't even have it. And that to me, it's just salt and pepper if you're lucky.
Yeah, well, that's the same in Denmark. I think paprika is literally the most spicy food item that they ever eat.
I don't know. Eastern Europe, they're all crazy about garlic. Like Eastern European food can be delicious for like a couple of weeks. But if you go any further than that, you realize that everything is pork and chicken and garlic. There's very little variation. Everything's garlic and paprika.
Well, there isn't very much garlic in Danish food. There's mostly just onions and...
That's because they're all witches.
Probably, yeah, but they eat a lot of pork.
So, Cara, will you come back for a Greenland update if you're still on mama leave, and
sure.
we can do a quicker one. You don't have to spend your whole baby walk and your nap time with us. If something interesting happens in Greenland, can we give you a quick call and see what the vibe is in Denmark?
Sure, you can do that. Yeah.
All right. And it's been amazing to talk to you. We end every episode, I'm sure you're an avid listener, so we end every episode with a public service announcement. Do you have anything you want to say, like to the racists of the world or something?
I hope you find a black or a brown person to love. And I hope that you will fall in love with somebody who's very different from you so that the gene pool doesn't include a lot of diseases.
You know, that goes instantly into the top 3 of public servants announcements ever said here. That's a great one. Yeah. I'll struggle to even follow that one. Like the gene pool, I'm just gonna have to agree. Like diversify the gene pool. That's a great one to end with.
Yeah, man. Exactly.
Right. Thank you so much, and give a big kiss to the baby as well from all of us.
Yeah, it will do. Cara,
all right. Bye. See you later, Cara. Bye.
Bye.